Good morning to those joining from the UK, from France. Also, good evening to those joining from Singapore, from Asia. I'm very pleased to be here today with Richard. I will briefly introduce Richard, but he will do so in the presentation. And so very pleased to have you, Richard, on board today. Thank you for joining. You have tremendous experience into marketing, more than 20 years of experience in leadership roles across fintech, across sustainability, and across telecommunication. I think you'll tell us a bit more later, what you do now for the past 4 years, how you've been helping brands for the past 4 years, but very excited to have you today as an expert. If you don't mind sharing the deck, then I can start explaining a little bit about the context of what we do, we learn with the expert here. So while Richard do this, let me tell you a bit more. We created this initiative last year with 3 objectives. The first objective is really to have mutual learnings, to have people to learn something specific about a topic. And we did many sessions in the past. Some were a bit more technical than others, about cookies when they were announced that actually they're going to stay. Some were about data, about CRM. But today it's all about marketing. So that's the first objective. Then the second objective, and you can move to maybe the slide 2, Richard, if you don't mind. Yeah. So then the second objective is to support the industry. So we created this initiative when we had there were lots of layoffs in the industry. As you know, big giants like Google, Meta, LinkedIn, Spotify, who we worked with them every day in, day out, they had lots of layoffs, lots of people were made redundant. At Jolt, we wanted to support the industry. We wanted to help people, and by doing this, we have them as experts to speak to our clients in front of our clients. We extended this to people like Richard, who are expert in a specific area in marketing, so they can also share that, and our clients can benefit from this. The third is really one of the core beliefs of Jolt, which is knowledge transfer. We really think that clients should have the opportunity to know more and to expand their knowledge, because then they'll be able to make more informed decisions on digital. And we know that digital marketing is changing so fast that it's very important that clients are well equipped to make the right decisions. So without further ado, I'll pass it to Richard, who will briefly introduce himself, and then start to talk about the topic today, which is all about, do we need branding or do we don't need branding, especially in the context of budget being drastically reduced this year, last year, and the year before. Richard, over to you. Maybe you can put it on full screen mode as well, because we can't see the slide in full screen.
Have you not got that on full screen?
No.
Okay. Hold on a moment.
Yeah.
That's me being foolish. Possibly.
No problem. Take your time. It will come, I'm sure.
I'm kind of working slightly blind at the moment. Hold on a moment. Let me just make sure I've got the right one going here.
Yeah, no problem. So at the end of the session, once Richard will finish presenting, we'll have a Q&A. So Jason, who is our GM for Asia, will moderate the Q&A. Everybody, in the call, don't be shy. Don't hesitate to ask any questions. I think this is really the moment where you can ask if really you need to do branding or not, or you need to prioritize more lower funnel with performance. We know it's very important to bring sales in, but we also know that branding is important for the long term, really important to have a brand which then later on can see the benefit of this. So here we go. Richard, over to you.
Okay, have you got the right screen now? Have you got...
Yes, full screen, you're on.
Perfect.
We see very well. That's great. And we can hear you very well. Brilliant.
Good. Excellent. All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm joining you from a very sunny south of the UK, sunny but quite chilly at the moment. So not as nice as it is in Singapore, I'm sure. Let me tell you a little bit about me. So I'm a fractional CMO, but I've been working in the field of marketing for about 20 years, probably a little bit more than that. In fact, I discovered last week when I happened to be outside my very first office in London and worked out when it was I started working. It was 30 years ago, which makes me extraordinarily old. But I started life actually in sales, in telesales, and kind of fell into marketing a little bit later on in my career. And that's kind of informed really my whole approach to marketing. It's kind of really very much customer focused because I'm very used to having those conversations with customers. I'm also completely self-taught. I don't have any marketing qualifications. And really I've learned through working with startups, scale-ups, but some larger businesses as well. And as Seb said, for the last few years, I've been focusing on being a fractional CMO. What that means in essence is that I work as a marketing head, marketing director, CMO for multiple companies at once. I also do quite a lot of coaching, whether that's coaching for startup founders or for marketing people. One of the groups of people that I really enjoy marketing is coaching is that marketing person who's kind of made their first jump into a head of role, which I remember being very tough, and feeling that you're very much on your own. And I kind of work a little bit with people in that position, which I find tremendously rewarding. Do drop in and say hello on LinkedIn. You can scan the QR code to get there, or you can just find me at Richard Leader. It would be good to make some connections. I should say that I'm not really necessarily a brand expert. I've been through a number of branding projects. I've done brand marketing, obviously, throughout my career. But I think where I am an expert is really in working with damaged budgets, working with small budgets, working with in situations where you need to get some results in fairly quickly, and to get some growth through the door. And I think that kind of plays into what we're going to talk about this morning a little bit. It's what to do really when your back's against the wall and you've got to kind of work hard to make your budget work for you. I want to talk a little bit about the scale of the problem this morning, and what you can do to prevent budgets being cut in the first place. And then I'm going to talk quite a bit about my framework. There's a framework which I think a lot of people would find very helpful in these situations. And then we'll have some tactical tips. And if we've got some time, some questions and maybe a bit of discussion afterwards. So let's talk about the scale of the problem, how big this is. This is a Gartner study which came out last year. It is just one study, but I think it holds true today. I think it's fairly representative of what has been going on in terms of budget. So this is total marketing budget as a percentage of total revenue. And this is from the US, UK, Europe, and a little bit wider, I think. So it's kind of going right across the market. And you can see pre-COVID-19, we were looking at marketing budgets being 10.5%, 11% of total revenue. And we had a big drop in 2021 for fairly obvious reasons, but it's never really made its way back up. And actually it's in decline now. And I think anecdotally speaking to lots of people, you know, that is set to head in the same direction this year. And that's really worrying for us. That is effectively a real-term cut in marketing budget in a world in which inflation is putting up costs, meaning we can do less and less. The interesting thing is how this translates into the mix within the marketing budget. So what we've seen is a decrease overall from going back to 2018 all the way through in MarTech spend. I mean, don't feel sorry for Salesforce, right? They're still the fastest growing company and enterprise price company in the world, right? So let's not worry too much about them. But it is worrying that we've seen quite a big spend drop in terms of percentage of overall marketing budget. In the technology side, we've seen a big drop in labor costs, down to 22% of the overall budget. And we've also seen a cut in agencies as a percentage of that budget. Where we've seen an increase is in paid media, but of course that's an increase in proportion to the whole marketing budget, and that's from a reduced budget. So we're probably not seeing huge increases in the actual cost on paid media. The real question is what that impact has on brand marketing, and that's what we're going to sort of talk about a little bit in just a moment. What I want to talk about, though, first is how we can go about preventing that. As marketing heads, marketing directors, marketing managers, we need to work hard on making sure that our budget isn't cut in the first place. And this is something that I've found really throughout the latter part of my career, is really trying to stop thinking like a marketeer and think much more like a business manager. And painful as this may seem, sometimes that involves making friends with the CFO. I mean, you don't need to go on a date night with them, but at the same time, you do need to get a little bit closer to them. And I think it's important when you're talking to finance people. One of the things that we do as marketeers is we try and justify our budget, justify our position, justify our role through getting a little bit technical in the way that we talk to finance people. And I think that's the wrong approach. Your marketing director, your finance director, your CFO doesn't want to hear about followers and engagement unless you can actually prove the link between those figures and business growth. Growth is what they want to hear about. And if you don't understand the language that the CFO is talking, you need to learn it, because they're not going to change their language for you. I think it's really important to do that and to work closely with them. And to show them that you're managing costs and you're managing profitability as if you were the founder of the business, and as if it was really your budget. And work out how your budget meets the long-term objectives of the CFO. They're interested in growth. They're interested in shareholder return. And you've got to work out how your budget really helps them achieve their goals. And this is something I think is quite an effective thing to do if you're not doing it already, is to schedule regular meetings with your CFO. This isn't for you to ask for more budget, but this is for you to talk through your results, for you to find out more about business performance overall, and for you to discuss the growth strategy. It's really about working in partnership with the CFO. And when you've got that relationship, then you can start to talk about the challenges of cutting brand marketing spend and other parts of your budget as well. And you can, if you can back that up with real-time, real-life data, then I think that's a valuable thing to do. This is an interesting study that I found from BCG, Boston Consulting Group, which they've done looking at businesses who cut brand spend between 2017 and 2019, and what that impact that had a couple of years down the line. And the long and the short of this really is that overall this leads to a rise in costs. So regaining lost market share required a future investment of $1.85 for every dollar saved from near-term reductions in that brand spend. That's, I mean, we kind of know this in marketing already, right? It costs more to gain than to maintain. We know that already, but this is kind of real life data which kind of helps cement that in the mind of your finance head. What BCG found was a decline in total shareholder return, a decline in growth rates overall, a market share drop, and a weakening of conversion and brand health. And I think all of these numbers really come together to make a fairly powerful argument for cutting brand marketing spend, for not cutting brand marketing spend. One of the things that I want to get clear is my definition of brand, and everybody has a different definition of it, I think. But what I'm talking about here really is that collection of thoughts and feelings that someone has about your service, your product, or your business. And that's kind of quite a difficult thing to measure and to work through. But I think it's a really important thing to be aware of. Everything that we do as marketeers influences the customer's thoughts and feelings about us and our product. And if you want proof of that, I would just ask this man, Gerald Ratner. Outside of the UK, you may not have come across Gerald. And if you're much younger than me, you probably haven't come across him either. But he's a fascinating character. He inherited a business, Ratner's Jewelers, in 1984. What he had was 120 fairly boring, middle-of-the-road jewelry shops on high streets in small towns that were posting a loss of £350 million a year. He focused really deeply on his customer. He offered products that they really wanted, and he spoke their language. And by 1990, he had 2,000 stores, a turnover of £1.2 billion, and profits of £125 million. And then in 1991, he stood up to make a speech at the Institute of Directors and destroyed his brand. He said his products were crap, and he said, we sold a pair of earrings for just under £1, which is cheaper than a prawn sandwich from Marks and Spencer's, but probably wouldn't last as long. Suddenly, the thoughts and the feelings that his customers had turned from having somebody on their side, having somebody who spoke their language, to somebody who was making fools of them. 6 months later, his share price had tanked by 80%, and 6 months after that, Gerald was gone. It literally took one speech to destroy everything that he had built in that extraordinary business. So brand is really important, and it's something that we need to be very careful of as we go. Okay, so we talked a little bit about brand budget and how to try and prevent it being cut. But in reality, we know that there's a chance that it is going to get cut if it hasn't been already. So what do we do? Well, make every pound, every penny, and every dollar count. I think what you need to do when you're faced with significant budget cuts is really go back to basics. Sometimes as marketeers, we can get a little bit complacent. This is not about being lazy. It's about falling into patterns of behavior and habits of work that might not be as productive as something else. As an external consultant going into businesses, I'm forced to reassess plans quite a lot. And it's remarkable how much I uncover things which marketers know already could be done better, but they haven't got round to changing things. Reassessing plans helps you to focus, especially if you do it in the context of a framework. Now, I've developed a framework that I call the SOAP framework, which I'm going to take you through this morning. I think it's a really handy way of quickly assessing where the gaps are in what you're doing, where the things are that need to be improved, and what you're doing well that you can double down on as well. I think if you work within a framework, you ensure that you're focused on the right outcomes, and that keeps you on track throughout the course of the year. So the SOAP framework stands for strategy, organization, process, and execution. So quickly, if we move through this, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because time is quite short. But strategy is the most important part of this. It's the underpinning of everything we do. Without a robust strategy, you're never really going to make the grade on a reduced budget. You've got less opportunity to make mistakes when you've got a smaller budget. So you need to get that strategy right. You need to make absolutely sure that your strategy is aligned with the business strategy. Go back to that conversation that we had with the CFO. We've got to have that conversation with the CEO as well. We've got to demonstrate to both of them that our strategy is central to their success. You've got to understand what they need from the business and what they need from you and how you're going to achieve that. You also need to get the fundamental parts of the marketing strategy absolutely on point. So that's your ideal customer profile, your value proposition, your tone of voice. You've got to make sure that that is as close to being perfect as you can get, because that's how you set yourself up for success. If you go into this with a limited budget and not a clear understanding of who your customer really is, then you're not going to achieve what you need to do. And you need to ensure that everybody knows the direction of travel. If you're managing the marketing team, it's so important that everybody is on board with the direction that you're heading in. I find it remarkable still when I go into businesses and I see people who are executing marketing, but they don't really know why, because they haven't discussed the strategy and the results that they're expected to get with their CMO. Organization. So there's two core parts of organization that are key to get right here. One is the right people to do the right work, and the other one is having the right tools on board. So the right people doesn't necessarily have to be a team within the organization. That can include your agency and it can include freelancers as well. But you need to make sure you've articulated your goals and what you're looking to achieve through your strategy section. But do you have the right skills available to achieve that through your network of team, agency, and freelancers? Do they have the right tools in place to achieve that? Is that the right? Do they have the right CRM? Do they have the right marketing platform? Do they have the right analytics tools in place to be able to achieve what they need to do for that? And it's a real challenge for you if you've got reduced marketing spend and you don't have the right tools in place. You might need to think laterally about how you're going to get hold of those tools. And have you built the right relationships across the business? We're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later on, but do you have really productive, healthy relationships with sales, with product, with customer success as well? Marketing really works with every part of the organization, and you need to ensure that you've got a good working relationship to do that. P is for process, and this is really about ensuring that you've got the right processes in place to deliver repeatable success. It means quickly recognizing success, understanding failure, and building on your ongoing improvements. You need to be able to measure and report on everything, but understand the difference between what you need to report on to yourselves as a marketing team and what the business needs to hear from you as well. It's going back to that language around followers and engagement and all of that sort of stuff. What does the business really need to hear? Probably sales, probably leads, if you're in the B2B environment, for example. And be able to adjust and improve as you go. I think it's a really important thing to do to keep a record, part of your process, to keep a record of every growth experiment that you undertake, to take time to report the reasons or the suspicions that you might have for failure of campaigns or growth experiments. You may be able to revisit those in the future and rework those. Finally, the fun part, execution. I don't want to talk too much about this because obviously execution will depend massively on your sector and what you're looking to achieve, the channel mix that you've got in place as well. But the key thing here is everything you're doing in line with the strategy. I think it's really important when you've got limited budget to look at everything you're doing and saying, does that really address my customer profile? Does that really reinforce the value proposition? Does that meet my customer pain points? And is everything you're doing there to enhance your brand? Think about how this particular communication, whether it's an email, whether it's a social media ad, whether it's a banner ad, whether it's a billboard ad, is that enhancing the brand in line with our strategy and in line with where we want to take those thoughts and feelings about our business in our customer's mind? And are you practicing full funnel marketing? I think it's really important. Again, this is going back to the communication piece, really keeping everybody on track and building brand with all activity. I think it doesn't work to have people focused on a tiny part of the funnel and not really understand where that fits in with the rest of the marketing plan. The question still remains. We've talked a lot about sort of theory there, but how can you actually afford to do brand marketing when your marketing budget has been cut? I would say let's start off looking at some tactical things, really. Actually, this is quite a strategic thing for tactical piece, but external partnerships, I think, are super, super important. If you can find and leverage partners for co-marketing opportunities, then you have such an opportunity to share budgets and share the rewards. It's not halving things, it's squaring things when you're working with a partner. The power of two brands coming together is super, super exciting and super profitable in a lot of cases. And I think when you're looking at partners, it's important to be ambitious. An equal partnership doesn't have to come from equally sized partners. So you can be a relatively small business and partner with a large business. It still works on that front. I've got a few little rules or hints, I guess, on how you can manage partnerships. And some of this really comes from my sort of direct experience, really. I didn't realize, and I think this goes back to being a salesperson at the start of my career. I'm about building relationships. You may have picked up on that. I didn't realize that I was particularly good at partnership marketing until I left a role where I'd been doing partnership marketing, among other things, for a couple of years. And we were a cheeky little startup, and we managed to get partnerships with a couple of banks, including Santander, with a mobile network, giffgaff, and with a high street retailer, Wix. We managed to land those partnerships. And sometime after leaving that business, I was talking to one of my colleagues who'd been at Santander, who'd moved on to somewhere else, and another one who was at giffgaff. And they told me that really the reason those relationships worked is because I was so easy to work with. I didn't realize I was particularly easy to work with, but in the context of their other relationships, their other partnerships, I got stuff to them on time. I did what I said I was going to do. I made allowances. I turned up for meetings on time. And all of those things, which I just thought were fairly basic and pretty much came from my life in sales, I think. So if you're embarking on the partnership side of things, I would say some fairly core rules for you. Set those goals together. Have a deep conversation with your partner. Understand each other's KPIs and take ownership for their success. Understand what your partner, what the person you're dealing with in the partnership on the other side is going to be measured on. You've got to help them be successful, and they will help you be successful. Don't be the laggard. Now, this is really important, right? and this is where partnerships fail, where people are waiting for things. You need to get set up with your stakeholders to ensure that you aren't the roadblock to anything. I work quite a lot in financial services, and so there are things like compliance of marketing materials, compliance checks and things. You need to make sure that you've spoken to your compliance team and say, this is a priority because we might lose this partnership if we don't get this signed off quickly. You need to work with those sort of people to ensure you're not the laggard here. I think it's important to be candid as well, to be prepared to share your pain points and to help your partner with theirs. Make sure you communicate constantly as you go through, and also get an agreement in writing. Should things turn a little bit unpleasant later on, you've got an agreement as to what you were looking to do, but it keeps you both on point, I think. But it's not just about external partnerships. I think when budgets are tight, it's an even more important to think about your internal partnerships. You may not have the budget you need, but others might in the organization. So working with other departments to achieve their goals as well as yours is what we're looking to achieve here. I saw a LinkedIn post the other day about how marketing shouldn't become a service provider in the organization, churning out brochures and job ads and presentations for the CEO's next conference and all of that sort of stuff. I think that's wrong, right? That's marketing. That's brand marketing. Embrace it, encourage it, use it to reinforce your brand. So I think if you are helping the sales team with their sales presentations, you're ensuring that the brand messaging is right. You're ensuring that you are transferring your knowledge through from the salespeople to the prospective customer. Job ads are super important. They're seen by hundreds, thousands of people, not just applicants, but people who may be interested in your business overall. Work with HR to ensure that job ads are on point, that the description of the business is right, that your brand values are being communicated through those job ads. Conference presentations, customer communications, all of those things I think are really important. PR, I think, is super important. One of the challenges with PR is sometimes we fall into a little bit of a trap. We know we can get coverage if we put out a certain press release on a regular basis. But I think it's thinking really carefully about whether that PR strategy and PR campaign is reinforcing your overall brand requirements and that strategy that we set right at the start of this. I think it's important to think about every potential customer touch point as an opportunity for brand marketing. I think one of the things you need to do when budgets are tight, and this is kind of what we do in startup world a lot, I think, is around this sort of accelerated test and learn. If we're looking for statistical relevance on every A/B test that we run, we may run into problems. It may take us a long time to get there. I'm not saying don't pay attention to that. It is important, but try and make some decisions based off the back of early data as if you possibly can. Embrace speed. I think it's really important, and encourage speed through the whole team. And be ruthless. One of the things that I find quite often if I'm doing campaign reviews for clients is that I will find, if I look at somebody's Facebook account or Meta account or somebody's Google account, I will quite often find campaigns that are not running profitably. And when you ask about that, it's kind of a pet campaign. Those things that we think are going to work out, we're sure are going to work out. We invest a little bit in it personally from the point of view of our reputation. We think, yeah, this is really going to work. And we let it run, and we let it run just a little bit too long. Be ruthless. You can't afford campaigns that are not working for you. Build a growth culture. And by growth culture, I think what we really need to build is something where everybody has those shared aims and ambitions. Everybody is desperate to grow the business and to find ways of doing that. Your whole team is a growth engine, and you can work on that with them and reward success for people. It doesn't have to be a financial reward. In marketing, I think one of the things that people love more than anything in marketing is just recognition for their work. Make sure that people are recognized throughout the business. I think that helps build that growth culture overall, particularly within the marketing team. And be innovative in your communication. More than ever, we need to innovate with our comms. We need to find the most effective channels and the most effective content. You probably know this. A lot of you are at the coalface day in, day out more than I am, but you probably know that there are little innovative things that we've maybe tried on TikTok, which we didn't even think would work, but have suddenly taken off. There are little things like a brand I know started running TV-only YouTube campaigns, which included QR codes on them. And they got a huge number of scans. So people watching YouTube on their TV, scanning the QR code, going to the company website. Particularly in the US market, I think that was something that was really interesting. They did it as an experiment. It worked. They doubled down on it. They did it again and again and again, and it carried on working. And I think focus on emotional impact and on storytelling, and use content that you have within the organization. I think there's quite a lot of content which is hidden in organizations, which you can unlock and use in quite an innovative way. So Pizza Express, a brand here in the UK, of pizza restaurants, were really struggling during lockdown, as you would imagine. They were doing some delivery stuff, but obviously the restaurants were empty. And one of the things that they started doing was sharing their recipes. So their dough balls are quite famous, their garlic dough balls, and they started sharing recipes for things like garlic dough balls, how to make them at home. What they were really doing in that is building the story of Pizza Express, helping people to feel part of that and focusing on the emotional impact. The emotion was, I'm stuck at home and I'm missing my Pizza Express dough balls. I want life to go back to how it was, and this is as close as you're going to get right now. I think that sort of thing, they didn't think it would have any real impact actually, but actually had a huge impact. And from a chain that was struggling a little bit pre-lockdown, they seem to be pretty much back on course, not just because they sold, they gave the recipe for dough balls away, don't get me wrong. And of course, make best use of your free marketing channels, if such a thing really exists. Repurpose and reuse content. I talk about this quite a lot on my socials. It costs a lot to create content. It costs a lot of time and effort to do that. So make sure that you can atomize that. Make sure that you can repurpose it and get it out in different places. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you will see some of this presentation coming out in posts over the next couple of months. I guarantee you bits and pieces of this will come out again, because it's taken me quite an investment of time to pull this together. I'm not going to use it just in one instance, but I will use bits of this content throughout. And I think that's a really important thing to do. Max out your organic socials. I know that organic social doesn't have the reach that it used to, and there's a really good presentation on the Jolt website, which you may have seen already, on the power of organic social. I would, if you haven't seen that, I would suggest that you do. I think it's a really, really good one. And ensure that things like your customer emails are productive. I think it's, it's, I don't know how many times I've worked in an organization where they produce a newsletter every month or every quarter, and it takes so much effort and so much work. And you think, how much are we actually benefiting from this? How much value are we delivering, either for the reader or for the business? Quite often the answer is not a lot. Can you use that time and effort more productively somewhere else. I'm guilty of this myself. I have an email newsletter that I send out to prospects, customers. It has virtually no impact, but I do it every month, and I've got to at some point call time on that. We've talked a little bit about PR, and we've talked about those job ads as well. Let me draw a couple of conclusions, and just to sort of wrap this up before we take any sort of questions, and maybe open the floor to a bit of discussion. To go back on this, really, I think it's really super important to build your relationship with finance. We need to get through to them, really, that it costs more to gain than to maintain. It's a key tenet of marketing theory, but it's something that we need to really get home to the CFO. Oh, I've got two there. I go back to basics. I had a CEO years ago who used to say, plan the work and work the plan. It works. Be rigorous in building on success and cutting failure. Build your relationships internally and externally. And I think that is the key point from here, really. It is about relationship building. Marketing has to sit in the middle of that organization, building relationships all the way around, and embrace speed and be decisive. I think that's it from me. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to raise or discuss or disagree with?
Thank you, Richard. That's really good, and lots of very practical tips. Loved it, and I think you used your entire experience, also from startup, of how to use the agility, the flexibility, the test and learn, which is very important. I really also love the fact that marketers should be more friends with CFOs, actually, because it's not about asking for budget. It's more about how can I help impact the P&L, the top line, and most importantly, the bottom line, right? So that's really good. Let me pass it to Jason, who will moderate the questions if there are any questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Seb. Really insightful session. I think the one that really resonates with me a lot is partnership. So maybe let me start with something around partnerships, right? How do you actually identify the right brands to partner with? We talked about external partners. Based on your experience, Richard, how do we find or identify the right brands?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes challenging. Sometimes it comes kind of quite naturally. I think you need to look for alignment in terms of values, in terms of goals, and in terms of customers. So it's about looking for brands that share your target audience without being direct competitors. So fairly obvious example, a fitness clothing brand might partner with a health food company. And that creates sort of mutual value and doesn't cannibalize sales on there. I think it's about, when you sort of identify those people, it's about whether you can share objectives and whether that makes sense for you to do that. And it's also about a deep understanding of what that brand might want to achieve from working with you. And it might not be obvious all the time. I worked with a brand called Make My House Green, who are a solar installation business. And we partnered with Nationwide, who are one of the leading mortgage providers in the UK. And the partnership there isn't that obvious, because if we were to offer commission on a solar install to Nationwide, it's maybe worth a couple of £100, right? It's not meaningful for them. So what were they interested in? Actually, what they were interested in was learning whether they could influence their mortgage holders to take sustainability measures on their homes. So that's actually what they wanted to learn from that. We shared a lot of values with Nationwide, and we had that shared outcome. We wanted to see solar panels go on the customer's roof, and it was a really, really important and exciting opportunity for us to do that. Other examples, Nike have worked closely with Apple. That's a very obvious brand partnership, really, when you come to think about it. The customer is the same, the motivation is the same, the outcome is very similar, but you know, they're not going to cannibalize each other's sales.
Cool. Thank you. So like, it's always nice to find brands that have natural synergies. So based on your experience, like, how would you define as effective partnership? I think that's always the question that clients have. Okay, we partner with this person, we partner with this brand. How would you define, like, at the end of the day, what makes a partnership successful or effective?
I think it's around sharing those goals in the first place, those KPIs, and understanding what you're looking to achieve from that. Very cynically, I worked with somebody years ago who was a partnerships manager, and we were working in a small fintech business, and she was selling into the big banks, partnerships into the big banks, and very cynically, she said her role was to get the partner that she was dealing with within the bank to get them their next promotion. That's what her job was to do. So it's a little bit cynical, but I think there are more effective ways of managing partnerships than that. It is around understanding that KPI. What is it that both of you want to achieve from this, and how are you going to do that? I think it's important to be honest and share reporting, and to have honest conversations when things are not going well as well. I think is really important as well.
Cool. Thank you. So I got a question from Scott. So thank you. So let me pose this to you, Richard. So Scott's question: when you have your budget cuts, how do you ask for the budgets to be raised later on? Does this ever happen? Does budgets get back up after you cut it?
I think that depends on your business, and it depends on your the CFO within that. I think the question is, ask that question not of me, but of the CFO. How do I get this budget higher? And the answer will probably be, prove that you can get a return on what I've given you. And I think that's a kind of a really important part of it. And if you're having those ongoing conversations with finance, I think it becomes easier to do that. It's more likely to happen in a sort of a smaller or a startup world, I think, because things are a little bit more fluid, and budgets are a bit more fluid. You're also, you know, you can have your budget cut at a moment's notice in that environment as well, of course. But I think it is about setting objectives with that CFO, right? So if you give me 10% of the budget, and I can work on that for the next month or 2 months, can we then come back and negotiate how I get 40% of that budget? You know, I think that's kind of the approach to take with it. It's about dialogue, and I'm sorry to say, a lot of marketeers shy away from dialogue. And I've done it in my past, right? We need to get better at working with the business overall.
Cool. Scott, does this answer your questions? Any additional follow-up points?
No, I think that's really great. Thanks very much for that, Richard. You do mention that we should befriend our CFOs and need to understand where they're coming from, which, again, I would agree with. But you also mentioned that brand is a collection of feelings and thoughts about a company. Yeah. And that's a really difficult concept for someone who's got their head in Excel all the time. So how would you particularly educate them around that? And I think also to Rory Sutherland's points on this as well. So do you have any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I mean, I think it's unfair to say that CFOs only have a head for numbers. I mean, some of them do have emotions, mostly anger, but no, they do have emotions within there, and I think they understand that. I think you can demonstrate that with them, but I think you've got to take it back to the data at the end of the day, and show them those sort of real life examples. Yeah, that BCG Boston slide that I shared there, I think, is an important example of that. the cost of regaining that market consideration is higher than the savings that we're making by cutting the budget. I think it is about, I wouldn't talk too much to finance directors about feelings of customers, but it is about, there are very few brands that can exist if the customer doesn't have a good feeling about them. There are a few, like Ryanair is an example of that here. Every single customer they have hates them, but they serve a purpose. And they have a sort of a fairly unique position in the market by doing that. Most of us can't afford to do that. Most of us have to have positive feelings. And that example from Gerald Ratner of how you can destroy that by lifting the veil a little bit is a pertinent example, I think. But it is about sort of continually explaining to that CFO that the more the customer is exposed to our positive brand message, the more likely they are to buy, and to buy in the long term from us as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the floor?
I think just for me, and I think it's more of a point, right? I think using the table that you showed where brands are spending less and less, and I think this is actually the time for businesses or for brands to have an internal look at themselves and see how they can actually whether refresh the brand or create a new brand messaging or brand voice for themselves. I mean, just to cite an example, and I've always cited this example, Adidas, when they had a measurement of whether it's brand marketing or paid marketing or event marketing that works well for them, and they found out that it was actually brand marketing that's fueling their sales. So I think you also mentioned a couple of points here. You mentioned it's all about the passion, and I think if a brand has a good passion point, if a brand stands what it stands for, people would naturally gravitate towards it. They wouldn't even look at other players for them. They would consider them, but because of what this brand represents, they will gravitate to them naturally. I mean, for example, Rolex, they don't sell watches. We know that they sell status. Even for Taylor Swift, I see Taylor Swift as a brand. She's not a person, and her product is songs. And whenever she releases a song, people will just buy, because she has built a strong brand for herself. And I think, unfortunately, in the current market right now, where inflation is rife, everyone is trying to survive in their respective roles. That's where everyone's head is inside the Excel sheet. Everyone's head is inside the P&L, that we forget to take a step back. Who are we actually selling to? We are selling to consumers. We are not selling to robots. So the brand, I think during this period, we have to go back and see how brands can reinvent themselves or refresh their product or their messaging.
I think that's absolutely true, and I 100% agree with that. And it's going back to that sort of strategic point, really, about understanding the customer, understanding the customer's pain point. And that's as pertinent in B2B marketing as it is in B2C marketing as well, right? It is still people that are purchasing this. And if you can't address an emotional requirement within that audience, then you're not going to get anywhere. And that's entirely what Taylor Swift does, right? She is entirely addressing an emotional requirement within her audience, and she knows that, and she can work that very closely. And I think it is, as I said, sort of going back to basics, really is about trying to work out, does this resonate? Is this what the customer is looking for? Go out and speak to them, right? That's the only way to do it. Go out and speak to them and find out that that's working.
Here. So hopefully, Kai, that answers your question. We got one question from the floor. So, managing editor, do you want to pose the question? If not, I can do it. Okay. Richard, the question here: how can one? Oh, there you go.
Oh, do you want me to say it?
Yes, please. Yeah, that would be
Hi,
great.
good morning. Sorry, I was late. Yes, I was wondering if you could give some tips or phrases to use with CFOs who essentially don't respect some of the work we do. So, for example, I work with a luxury hotel, and we were with the marketing department, hosting events for the guests, such as film screenings, meet the author, talks, things like that. Come decorate the Christmas tree, and also it was open to members of the public. And because it didn't have a big enough, the idea was that then people would then linger and have a drink. Often they did buy a drink to attend the event, and then maybe go to the restaurant. But when we wanted to host a charity lunch for the King's coronation, we couldn't even get them to give us £1,000 to help this, and they didn't see why they should do it. And we were trying to explain, or we want to build a relationship with the community so that it becomes like the neighborhood's favorite hotel, and they think, oh, I'll save up and have mum and dad's anniversary dinner there, or and they just weren't interested in any of this, and did see guests as cells on an Excel spreadsheet. How and we just couldn't get through to them at all. I mean, maybe they're right and we were wrong. How do you come across this a lot?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. So how do we talk to these people?
Yeah. It is about just trying to draw closer with them and trying to prove to them the value in what you're doing. So if you can demonstrate that some of those people who came in for your events have subsequently been into the hotel, have subsequently become a line on your spreadsheet, then I think you've got that proof there. If you can't prove that, then maybe it didn't work, or you didn't put the right measurement things in place. And I think it is important. You can't measure every element of brand, of course you can't, right? We know that it's a challenging thing to do, but where you have physically had people into a space, you should be able to then track what they do subsequently from that, I think. And there are numerous studies, I think, that talk about how those sorts of things and how brand activity can increase consideration as well as awareness. And I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. We talk a lot about brand awareness, but consideration is more valuable to us. 100 years ago, I was working for a telco in the UK, TalkTalk. They were then about third or fourth biggest telco, and their big brand activity was they sponsored the X Factor on TV. And one of the amazing things we found from going out and doing brand surveys was when we were advertising on X Factor, when we were doing that, we expected to see brand awareness go up. Of course we did, right? We were on TV several times on a Saturday night in front of millions of people. But actually what we saw was brand consideration go up. What we saw was it drove sales. We weren't selling in those ads, right? It was merely a sponsorship note that was in there. But that brand activity drove sales, drove consideration as much as it did drive awareness. But you've got to go out there and prove it.
Right. Well, that's a good phrase to use. I wasn't aware of brand consideration. I knew about awareness. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I have another one, if it's not greedy. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
For example, I know that certain the big companies have financial cycles, and you have to choose your moment to, when there's a lot of money sloshing around. In the UK, am I right in thinking a good time to pitch a project is maybe October, November, when they're settling their budget for the following year? Or because I don't often work with the CFOs, sadly, in all the companies I've worked with, there is a big separation between finance and creative. So do you have any insights on when's a good time to tug at their sleeve for a bit of cash.
Yeah, I think it's earlier rather than later for sure. I think it does depend on your organization but as I sort of said at the start of the presentation, if you can affect some sort of monthly meeting or even a quarterly meeting with marketing, with finance, you are a big line in their spend, right? If even if it's down to 7% of revenue, that's a big line in the spend of the CFO. They should be giving you time, but they're not going to volunteer that time. You've got to go to them and say, I want you to help me plan the marketing side of things, and I want to work closer with you on this. Flatter their expertise and get some time with them. And what you might even do is you might badger the CFO so much that they say, look, I haven't got time for this. I'm going to appoint one of my team who is going to be your go-to person. And then you've got somebody there for a fortnightly meeting or whatever it might be, who can then argue your case. That's your opportunity to teach them more about marketing while you're learning more about finance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more? Any more questions from the floor? Okay, Scott.
How do they work with smaller companies? So in the olden days, I used to walk up to the desk, right? Slightly harder to do now, but I think you can still try and get time with that, with the CFO. Quite often in a that CFO will be, as I am from a marketing point of view, they'll be a portfolio finance director. So they may not have a huge amount of time, but I think try and build that in. You in marketing should be part of that leadership team along with finance. So I think you still need to kind of pose it really about how can I help you achieve your goals. I think it's the same in a smaller business as it is in a large one. You just might struggle a little bit for time.
Okay. I think we are running out of time.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, no more questions. I would like to thank Richard. Thanks for the session, and thanks for all the questions. I think this is one of the sessions where we had quite a bit of good engagement from the floor. So thank you everyone for joining the call. I appreciate it. Seb, any closing remarks?
Well, a big thank you to Richard for really all these insights and very practical tips. Really loved it. So thank you very much for sharing, Richard. Everybody who joined the call, don't hesitate to ask us here in London or in Asia any questions that you have, anything we can help you with. We'd be happy to. We'll have the recorded posted on the usual places. And thank you again for joining. Have a wonderful day or wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
All right.